Welcome to the OpenHearted podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the OpenHearted podcast. I'm your host, Will Wheeler, and I'm joined by my guest co-host today, Sophia. Sophia, how are you today?
Really excited about who we're talking to today, Will.
Totally. I'm excited about this one too. But how's your week been anyway, Sophia?
It's been pretty good. We were just having a brief chat sort of off air about just burnout and so forth. I've got a very close person to me that's going through that at the moment. Just I feel like there's always a need for further education around it and understanding and why it happens, what's happening, and all of those things. So no doubt we'll probably have a podcast.
Totally. Burnout. And, I think that might even be something we'll probably touch base a little bit today on, all that type of stuff. But, I don't think we should waste any more time. So let's call up onto the stage our guest for today, Dr. Tiffany Jamieson from all the way from the OC in California. Am I correct?
Yeah, representing.
All right, cool. Let me just get this all sorted. Tiffany, it is so great to see you again. How long has it been since I've chatted? Well, besides we chatted about 5 minutes ago, but before then, it's probably been
a couple months. I think I've been slacking a little lately, trying to get my housekeeping around here in shape. But it's summertime. Brought my first kid home from college after her first year. Well,
oh really? How's it going? Because I do remember when we were chatting last, you were saying how you were on a plane coming back from, I'm not 100% sure where your daughter was studying.
Who's in North Carolina. So my daughter is an ADHDer, studying neuroscience to find out more about the ADHD brain. So, and then my autistic son's taking finals next week. He's at junior doing creative writing and video game design. And just and added a computer science degree on top of that. So he will be in school for a while. But he is killing it.
Wow, that's awesome. North Carolina, isn't that where Michael Jordan played?
No, he played for that. Oh yeah, yes, UNC for He was in college at University of North Carolina, Charlotte. I'm not Charlotte, Raleigh Durham.
Oh, so is that a different North Carolina?
Well, it's all North Carolina as a state.
Okay, no, but the college, but there's probably like 3 or 4 different.
Colleges. Here in the States, we have California State, 15 of them. Whatever.
Damn,
so
all right.
So that one is really cool. There's a lot of really awesome athletes that come from that school.
Wow, crazy.
Yeah.
But really, we should get stuck into what we're going to be talking about today. But before I do get stuck into that, it just reminds me. So if we've got anyone listening, and I'm sure there is some people listening because I had someone just comment through saying hi to everyone. So hello to you. It didn't come up the name of the person, but thank you. But if you are listening, please subscribe, like, and follow to all of our social media platforms. We now have our own website as well. So if you visit the OpenHeartedSociety.com website, you can read all of our new blogs coming out weekly now, our recent podcast, plus old podcasts. You can connect with us on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn. I can't think of any else. I don't think I can fit any more up the top there. If there are any more, we'll try and fit them in somewhere else. But really, let's get stuck into this. This one's a really important one. And, I thought when we connected, Tiffany, there was no better person to do this than yourself because you are the master at this.
Anything in this field.
Well, you're doing a lot better than me. So I take if I could take my hat off without taking off my earphones here, I would. But
you don't want to see your head, so it's okay.
Yeah. So what we're going to be covering today is the importance of manager neurodiversity training. And I think the biggest thing when I first reached out to you and said, hey, look, can we talk about this topic with you, is that it's so important, one. And I think as well, when we think of neurodiversity, especially when I've, done some coaching with clients in the past, I think sometimes people have a sort of think that, that person is the problem, and by coaching that person, that's going to make them better, type of thing. And we all know that, yeah, you can coach a person and give them some, tips and things which could potentially help them a little bit. But it does come down to a lot of understanding the culture, the, support, all of that type of stuff, So that's what we're going to be covering today. So if anyone's listening to us, if you've got any questions, please comment through, because we love hearing all of these questions through the episode here, and it just makes it cool and interesting. So let's get this ball rolling. So Tiffany, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, because, there's so much great stuff you're doing.
Well, I have a weird background. I actually was a programmer and a product manager for software. So that was my initial life. Tiffany 1.0, I call it. And then here comes children, and here comes autism and ADHD. And I got really involved in the community. Just, I found that there were so many people who weren't go-getters like me, and kind of obnoxiously going out and finding information and solutions for a lot of different reasons. They didn't have time, they didn't have money, they didn't have education, whatever it may be. And it made me sad. So I went and started resource fairs. So we brought in like a bunch of community members and had, a bunch of just resources for people all in place. And then a lot of speaker series where we just talked and brought information to people, provided daycare so they can come and learn something. And that kind of started my passion in this whole community. And then when my kids got more independent and I needed to not helicopter, because, you had to helicopter for those first, 10 something years, 10, 12 years, I got really bored. I got bored easy. So I went back for my MBA. And when I was finishing up my MBA, Master's of Business Administration, I did do capstone, so a business plan. And that'd be something related to autism, So I started doing some research, and I saw this statistic about 85% unemployment rate. And I was like, shut the front door. No. And I just remember being in my room and it's spinning, and I'm like, no. I know these kids. They're great kids. They're amazing. This can't be true. What's going on? So I dove in, and I couldn't find any answers. No one knew why. And at that point, I didn't have a choice. I had to start to do something about it. So being a previous consultant in different lives, I started a consulting company, Written Flow, with no idea what we were going to do besides look at this challenge, this problem. Didn't know what it meant. Didn't know what it was going to be. And I started my PhD in organizational psychology, which I finished. So my research for the last 5 years has been on, employment, what's going on. So during that time, I've been able to do some international projects, meet a lot of people all over the world, create LinkedIn learning trainings, all focused towards businesses and being, better colleagues, being better people in there. But, through this research, it was trying to figure out why this unemployment rate, and a couple of things came to mind. First is the need to disclose. It's an issue. I mean, there's so many issues about it, but many people who are neurodivergent do not consider themselves disabled, and most of the systems worldwide are marked the disability box. So there's a whole misconnection there where you're already putting it in this deficit-based, and people are like, I don't want that. There's the stigmas, there's all this, but that's just the individual. What I found out is the human resources and the managers are so fearful of getting it wrong, of breaking a law, of doing something like that they don't even want to do it. And it's not because they're trying to be like, oh, I don't want to hire that person because they're blah, blah, blah. It's, I don't want to get this wrong. I'm so scared of getting sued. I'm not going to do it. It's almost like
spot on.
Can I say something on that? And that is such an interesting point that you've raised there. Even in the education space as well, and I'm talking about adult education here, right? And we've got like governing bodies here in Australia, which is it's called ASQA. And so they're the ones who make sure that when you're, training people or whatever you're doing is correct. You're doing it by the book, and, you're meeting all those the competency standards to ensure that person is, you know, meeting a competency standard type of thing. Now, the thing is as well, and I've even spoken about this with other people who work in that, who are actually neurodistinct themselves, and they're like, they don't even want to touch neurodiversity because they're afraid of, they don't know what to do, and they're afraid of doing the wrong thing and then getting sued, all that, which sort of comes back to exactly what you're talking about there. There's no real guidelines or pathways for people to understand or what to do.
No, I mean, the businesses are trying. I mean, and you know, it really comes down to the fact that we need to educate people better. But you know, to me, it's to be good at listening to accommodations or anything else. You have to have your ears open. But having your ears open is one thing, but you got to know how to catch it. So if I'm asking for an adjustment or something else, and I'm throwing a ball at you, and you don't know how to receive it, what good is it? Because you haven't been trained. So a lot of times with a manager training is, how do you hear when someone's asking for something? Because it doesn't have to be like, oh, I need a formal accommodation. I would like, you know, sometimes it's like, I have a back problem. It causes me a lot of pain. So I need to That's asking for an adjustment or an accommodation for them. And that needs to be considered. So that whole process of formalizing everything and the whole, you know, stuff, or I'm doing it wrong and right, and actually being able to understand what's going on, it just causes this disaster of unemployment. And that's before we even get to a chance to talk to each other.
Totally. Sorry, Sophia, did you?
Not the interview yet.
Sorry, Sophia, did you want to share something?
Share something about?
It just looked like you were wanting to ask a question or something.
Oh, I'm just nodding my head saying hallelujah, because this is exactly what the sorts of conversations that I've had. There are managers that are very well-meaning. They just need some guidance and support around how to tackle those conversations, and that education piece. And the right education, that's the critical part of this as well, you know, is so important.
Yeah. And it's hard because, you know, we say the word neurodiversity. What the heck is that? That's like a million different things and combinations of everything else. So now we're throwing out these words like neurodiversity, which is a great word. It's a movement, though. It's actually not a diagnosis. So, and it's growing with what it can mean. So if we're asking a HR manager to understand neurodiversity, we're actually asking them to understand half of the diagnostic manual. You know, it's too much stuff. So you have to take away those labels and diagnoses and really get down to individual level management, which is what it comes down to. So as I was doing all this research, I found, you know, there's a lot of research right now about people in the workplace who have been successful, or usually these, you know, kind of targeted hiring groups, cohorts. And, you know, I call them, you know, glorified sheltered workshops sometimes, because it's really not true inclusion and belonging, but it's a step in the right direction. And we've gotten a lot out of those. But what the research tells us, that the ones who have been successful and been able to sustain employment are the ones who have had a good line manager. That direct manager. Over and over again, that tells us in the literature that that's the success factor. So, you know, knowing that there's this fear, knowing that it really has to go to the individual, kind of led us in the direction of figuring out how we were going to help change this dialogue. And what it really was to me is, it's not that I need to go focus on the individual, the neurodivergent. I need to focus on the company to meet them where they're at. So, you know, I keep going.
Totally. You know, I think this was, and the reason why I put up this question. So I put up, why is neurodiversity management training important? And, you know, you said it right there. You know, when the most success that people have been having is once the line manager has that understanding, because, you know, I think the biggest, well, for example, right, and I was going to share this before, was that I remember when I was younger, and I suppose this is what made me wanted to really go into the neurodiversity space, or go, man, there needs to be more stuff done here, is that I remember, and this is going back probably about 7 years, maybe 8 years ago now, when I was a teenager, you know, I'm only joking there. Yeah. And I would share, hey, look, I'm dyslexic. I didn't know I was ADHD back then. And the managers had no idea of what to do. Do you know what I mean? And it's sort of like sometimes I find that a lot of neurodistinct people don't know what they need, so they may go to their manager and say, hey, look, I'm this, I'm sharing this with you because I need help. But then those managers have no understanding of how to help as well. So why is this neurodiversity management training important?
You just opened a can of worms right there.
Totally.
So it's a twofold thing that comes up to it. So we talked about the managers need to know how to hear. So what we try to do is take out some of the language that makes it really complicated, disclosure, accommodation, adjustment. We try to say, how do you work best? Mm-hmm. And if we go to each individual, everybody in the company and ask, hey, Will, hey, Sophia, how do you work best? How can I allow you to thrive in this environment to do your best work? So if I'm asking you that from an interview perspective, if I'm asking you that from, the everyday work process, then at that point, I'm allowing you to get what you need. And you're not having to tell me you're broken. You're not having to explain a diagnosis, which, if someone tells you they're autistic or an autistic person, what does that mean? I haven't really met a lot of people whose traits are exactly identical in each culture. Every culture is different. You put all those combinations together, you don't know what's going to happen. So by saying more about what you need to be successful or asking that of somebody, it makes it easier to really put it into black and white. But here's the problem. If I go to businesses left and right and I say, you need to ask everybody, how do you work best? You give everybody the option to get what they need to do their best work, accommodations, whatever you want it to be. Say, okay, we do that. We're going to ask people. The problem is people don't know how to answer that, like you said. So we can go in anywhere. And I do this with manager training. I ask them first, hey, how do you work best? And I get the, most of the time. They've never thought about it. And so we'll do things like learning style inventories. Are you an auditory or visual? Are you a tactical learner? Like all those different things. So they start learning like, oh, I do learn better when I do it some way. Like I'm a visual learner. I got to get up there and draw and do all these things. I see in pictures, when I'm seeing the words. And that's how I learn best. So when my team and I get together, they know it's best to start drawing me a picture if you want to get it around quicker. But they have to come, I think, managers to that realization of what it means to have a learning style and how much learning isn't just like learning and development. Learning is onboarding, my job I need to do, all the training you do, learning how to communicate with people. That's all learning. And that's the way things need to come at you in a way you can absorb it best as an individual. So the business has to be aware of that, which is hard because people aren't. But also, once again, we need to go back to our youth. We need to go back to our high schoolers. We need to go back to our college students and have them learn how to self-advocate, understand how they work best, how they learn best. Because they have to be able to communicate this, like you said. Just because you say, hey, I'm autistic. Hey, I have ADHD. What really does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. What does it mean? And this is the thing, unless you are that person or live with something similar, you're not going to know what to do type of thing, Sorry, Sophia, you had something you wanted to share.
I just wanted to share recently, I came across this really cool document and it's being shared through the Australian HR Institute. It's called a personal operating manual. Mm-hmm. So it's something that everyone within the organization fills in. It's not targeted, so it's not necessarily someone feeling as though, oh, hang on a second, I'm in the spotlight here asking for these adjustments. And it covers what you were saying, Tiffany. I think it could be tweaked just so that some of what you mentioned before about learning styles, actually having some more probing questions in there to really help people with that self-identification piece. Mm-hmm. But I think that's a really good step forward, if organizations are able to implement something like that, and then it's shared maybe just within immediate teams to begin with, because we all have our different ways of communicating, our preferred ways of receiving feedback. And all of those things can trigger stress within an organization or within a team if it's not done correctly, if that makes sense. So I just thought I'd mention that because it was really cool. I was really pleased to see it.
Yeah.
But you know what? Sorry, Tiffany, you go.
Yeah, no, I was saying I've seen that in companies, some really successful companies who are, really focused on intentional hiring and neurodivergence. They usually have like their operating manual is, I don't work well. I don't like meetings at 9 a.m. I don't like this and this. But here's the challenge I see with that, which, I love straight out, let me tell you what I need here. But what if you're working in a group of 10 people and you got to find that happy place to meet. So I always say, and I probably drive everybody crazy, it's a happy compromise. I need to tell you what I work best, but I also need to know I'm not always going to get it. And that's okay. As long as I know you respect that and you try when you can. It's kind of like my team. I say, I don't care when you work. I don't know how you work. All I know is do what you say what you do. And when there's a customer involved, it's no negotiation. You show up with some clothes on. That's pretty much it. And that works out. And sometimes it's a 7 a.m. meeting when that is not my morning person's time, I'm sorry, it's a client. I can't control everything. And they know that, but we've talked about it and communicated it. But I find sometimes people are too absolute. So I find I had a client who wanted to allow people to, ask for these types of things they need. But they were so worried about people coming down on them if they weren't able to get it done, or them being such high demands that everybody required that if they weren't able to do it, they were failing at the effort. So it was kind of an all or nothing at some point. So I think companies that's a fear they have about offering these options out. I mean, it's even like you're seeing in remote work. Oh yeah, it's great. We'll keep doing this after the pandemic. We're not so sure right now. It can't be all or nothing in business. We're changing all the time, and it's hard to change as a business. But I think it's also hard when you find somebody who's neurodivergent. And many times, flexibility of thought isn't a strong suit. Not always, but sometimes. Thinking you're getting into this job in a certain way and that you're going to get certain things, then getting your team changed or the environment changed or something else. It's like, I didn't sign up for this, and that big adjustment piece. So there's so much involved in all of that when you ask for how you work best and getting those things that can change all the time. And we're not really prepared with the great communication, feedback mechanisms, everything else to be able to handle those hurdles well as teams, as employees and managers and coworkers.
It raises, and it's just so good because it flows so well into our next question, right? So what are the challenges you have found regarding neurodiversity training for managers? And one thing I will say, especially when you and I were talking ages ago, you were talking about a situation you were with someone, and a big problem was the manager itself. They were the issue a lot of the time, and I've even spoken to people who, because I think some people's managing or leadership style is so completely different, or I wouldn't even call them leaders, right? You're seeing some people under really high pressure situations who have never maybe worked under a good leader. And then they've got someone who is maybe neurodivergent who is struggling. And then it's sort of like, get rid of that person, they're a problem type of thing. And really when the manager's the problem themselves, but they can't actually see that they're the problem, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot to unpack there too. So you're like, with every statement. So a couple of things. A lot of people who are in management today, when they didn't have an alternative career path, they had to go into management to get promoted. That's just the way it used to be. So by having alternate career paths that we try to do now and encourage, you have people who may not be a good manager, not be in management, but still get promoted and things like that. But the scenario we have today is we have all these people that aren't necessarily good managers in management positions. We also have an aging population. And though it's not about empathy or understanding, it's just a different time, a different way business was done. It was a lot more cutthroat. There wasn't so much about well-being and people. It was about the bottom line, everybody doing the same thing. and fitting into a mold. So we have so much top heavy of that, but we have all this new theories and people coming in that expect this well-being and this person-centered approach to everything, and it's not all about the bottom line. So now you have this, just this mix coming into the workplace right now. So if you put a neurodivergent now in that world, you're trying to help somebody learn how to navigate social situations that are already hard and work social situations, but now you're having to do it in different prisms of people and the way they work. So that's a whole issue there. Sometimes a manager just isn't prepared nor willing to be a person-centered management. And that's what you have to be. That's what we teach. We're not doing any big neurodiversity special thing. It's about being a person-centered manager, focusing on what the individual needs are. And you have to be able to be calm, be collected, have your own stuff together to be able to focus on somebody else. And if you're a manager always elevated and agitated and trying to, chase your own tail around with your job, and your boss isn't empowering you to have space or empowering you to have, some room to do these types of things, they just want, delivery, you're not going to be able to do that. So it's so many different things. It's like you said in the opening, it's culture. The culture of the company has to allow, managers to get trained. So we're working with this great company now, and we're doing it more as they want to intentionally hire more people who are neurodivergent. It's not a hiring initiative, anything else. We're just saying, we know there's a different way, but we know we're not doing it right because we're not attracting this types of candidates. How can you help us? And we said, well, it's the way you attract jobs. It's the job descriptions, everything else, but it's also the way you manage them. And so they're taking a conscious effort to do management training with these work groups that we're starting with. So they've had managers that are excited to take on this kind of pilot, different way of doing business. They're excited about it. They want to be trained on it. The company's investing the money and the time for them to take the courses. They're investing in us, and they're allowing them time to see how it works and allowing us to be there. We kind of, the way our work is we do constant conversation. So like we educate, we coach, hey, you got this, but we stay there to say, if something's going wrong and you don't give somebody a way to deal with it, like, I don't know, say someone's having a self-stimulatory behavior that's, really, unusual in the workplace, harmful or whatever it may be. But if you don't have that conversation about it, whatever that conversation needs to be in that workplace, it becomes then this elephant in the room and things continue to get worse. So by having managers and leaders supporting managers that have access to, accurate information, people that listen, people that are in touch with the community at the same time, that allows them to become better managers. And we call it as like a good manager training is when you give people a toolbox of things they can pull out, like, what do I need? Because no situation is the same, but I have a bunch of foundational skills that I can recognize and hear and see is going on, pull out those skills, try my best to use them, recognize when, maybe I need to try another way, or maybe I need to call in some help. That's what manager training is about.
And so can I just say on that, like I said before, that when I was younger and I said, hey, I'm dyslexic and asked for help, there was no help there. But once, say, a manager has that understanding, and you said they may have all these different tools that they might be able to use and all of that, that's one, it's going to help them as a manager because they're going to think, man, I got this. You know what I mean? Yeah, totally. And then also too, the employee is going to be like, oh my God, what a relief. I can be myself. They've got me. I'm able to do this, and they understand why I'm struggling with this, and we can find other ways to potentially, because I think sometimes I think that, it happens in education as well. It's sort of like, oh, that person's not even trying. And it's like, that person is wanting to try. They really want to try. And it's like, but we just need a different way of doing this to help them achieve the goal that they're trying to achieve, type of thing, if that makes sense.
Well, I think too, and I find in our manager training, there's another piece of it that's not so much about giving skills, it's about giving knowledge about the community. So in my experience as a consultant, and seeing it with, the people I'm surrounded around, is there's been a lot of bad deals given, a lot of people jumping to conclusions, a lot of jobs lost, a lot of neglect, or just bad juju has happened. So when I get put, I actually had this, I had a client that helped, change their entire hiring. They had over 45 people that came from inclusive hiring practices. But what we found is when the person got in, they had a job, they had a supported employer that they happily disclosed with, they got whatever adjustments they needed. Everybody was good. But when someone had to give them feedback, as you would with any job, they were sitting there waiting for the shoe to drop. As soon as one little negative, I'm not perfect, I'm not doing great, literally running out the door. I had chased people out the door. And it's about taking the feedback. But it's, we're coming in, and I know I come in after some bad work environments. I had a very toxic boss and a bully boss. I was like that in my next job. I was waiting for something from my other boss to do it. That's just the way we are. But that was just my job. If I had a whole life of people not accepting me who I am, of course I can't handle. Not I can't handle. It's going to be more difficult sometimes to get feedback. So we spend time saying, look, you got to think about the life that people may have had getting up to this point. Now you need to do constant check-ins. You need to make sure everybody understands what you're communicating and what you require. How does that happen? Written checklists, have people repeat it back, send it up in emails, check in every week, check in every other day, figure out what works, because we want them to feel comfortable. And if we get to that point where suddenly we're giving them feedback and they're not expecting it, we haven't been developing that relationship of giving that feedback in. But also letting the manager know that if you do see this, as you close up, it's because of that, and you may have to find a different way to go about it or something. But it's not because the person doesn't want to be there, or they're not. Sometimes the message received by the manager is like, I don't need to change. I don't need that. I find like with my children or young adults, it's hard to change that. That the first response is always, a little bit on some of these things, but then they think about it and they're like, okay. We need to give space for that growl and humble and walk away a little bit and allow people to process. And that's another thing you teach managers. It's about processing time. It's you're differently. It's because your mind's working differently. Maybe you're doing all this interpretation, going on about that. Maybe you're not using, concise words, and you're using all these, sayings or anything else or jargon, and I have no idea what you're saying. Don't take that as not being engaged.
And yeah, totally. And, I think it's also too that I was speaking to someone a while ago who was like a high up person in a corporate company. I'm not going to name the company. And, he was talking about this we're talking about this client of mine, and they were talking about, because with this client of mine, this person has like 10 different managers. Do you know what I mean? So there's some managers he gets along with. Then there's others who have this like mindset of like, well, I can do it. That means you need to do it as well. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, everyone's different. We don't have the same strengths. We have different weaknesses, all of those types of things, type of thing. So, it's interesting when we do look at that. But when I heard that this person had like 10 different managers, I was like, that's your problem right there. I said, this person needs to really be with someone who they can thrive under, who understands that they might struggle with this type of stuff. Because a lot of the feedback that this person was getting, it was like ADHD to a T. Do you know what I mean? The person's not understanding everything in the meeting. Yep, tick, ADHD right there. You know what I mean? So what other things could they have done to really help? And having that understanding of this kid, would have really helped this person.
Not even that. I mean, it's people need a clear line of sight in organizations. And if you have 10 managers, and when that's not clear, who you go to for what, well-defined roles. Role ambiguity could be the death of any organization. But I think, especially when you're trying to be more neuro-inclusive, if I don't know what you do and why to go to you in black and white, then I'm lost. So problems aren't getting solved.
The thing was, this place, I wouldn't say it's neuro-inclusive. Do you know what I mean? I'm only being brought in there to help this person because they think it's the fix. You know what I mean? It's like the environment is the problem.
It's the environment.
I'll continue taking your money. I'll continue taking your money every week. But it's
I don't want 10 managers. Would you want 10 managers? Like, who wants one from me now? Are you all coordinating your wants?
Well, that's the thing. But this is how this workplace is set up, because I've spoken to them about that, and they're like, it's just, this is how it's done in this industry. You're going on different, you've got different jobs every couple of weeks, so you've got a different manager or whatever like that.
Which is a culture thing. We've actually are talking about that right now with some things going on in our world, and you have to make it a culture-wide thing to be neuro-inclusive or take into account. You just can't train one person and expect everybody else just to pick up on it. If you have, and this was a discussion we were just having with my team, is if you're having somebody who's got one manager who understands them, accommodates them, but then you're tossing them out to other environments, if you haven't prepped those other environments, in some way, or empowered the individual to be able to self-advocate enough to get what they need out of the environment, then it's really going to be a crappy situation for everybody involved.
And that's the situation we're in. Sorry, Sophia, did you say?
I just wanted to say, like, in terms of my experience, when I'm brought in, it's often when there's an escalation. So it's gotten to the point where it's crisis stage. And now recently in Australia, most of the states have rolled this out, but there's a psychosocial hazard code of practice that's in place. So now it identifies 14 psychosocial hazards that the employer needs to be aware of, and it falls under the Work Health and Safety Act. So now in Australia, it's more important than ever for managers to have a really good understanding around, what some of these stresses are, and the interventions can be very basic, in terms of even just doing a sensory assessment of a workplace. I've realized now after my diagnosis that I really hate fluorescent lights, and I would get really tired towards the end of the day in a particular workplace. And I would be sitting there thinking to myself, why is it that I'm literally putting my head on the desk at 4:30 and everyone else seems chirpy and happy? And I realized that it was because of the lighting that there was an issue. And I feel like these things aren't necessarily rocket science, and it's just wonderful that there are people like you and the work that are doing the work that you're doing, same with you, Will, where we can just highlight these simple considerations. Changing those light bulbs could make the world of difference. I spent some time yesterday at the Victorian State Library on a project just doing a sensory assessment for a particular organization, and just picking up on all of these little things that could really trigger someone. So those are my thoughts anyway.
Totally, no, and totally valid. But do you know what, Tiffany, right? And with your LinkedIn Learning, right, with the ADHD one, right, that's been really effective. One, it's free. Do you know what I mean? So with a lot of managers, a lot of the time I'll say, hey, look, because, time's a factor. I don't have all hours to sit there, and they don't have hours to sit there. And it's easy to go, hey, look, here's a great tool. Why don't you watch? But some of them don't even go to that length to watch it. And I'm like, all the information is right here. It's free. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Why don't you use it?
It's free. Actually, you have to have a membership for LinkedIn Learning.
Oh, yeah. But you can get
just making sure.
But a lot of them do have so when I mean free. Yeah.
Managers will pay the $30 to watch the class, and you can get HR certifications and things like that. I find, so we have our third course coming on. My co-author, Nicole Seward, who's a late diagnosed autistic female organizational psychologist. Also, we did the course together, and it's awesome. I'm so excited. It's awesome.
What is the name of the new one you're doing? Because I've seen you are you not allowed to say?
Well, I don't even actually. I think it's called supporting autistic colleagues in the workplace. Something like that.
When are you doing the dyslexic one? You said you're going to.
I know. I'm trying to work on that. You got to get the queue for LinkedIn, but I think that's a whole other discussion we need to have on how to put all those things together. It's what I find the most from those trainings is people go, "Oh, I never thought of that," or "I see it more now." But the people who do identify as neurodivergent, ADHD, or whatever, they go, "I have tools now in the workplace to use." So I think for me, I made these for HR and coworkers to be a lot more supportive and just more aware of the differences in the workplace. But it warms my heart and brings tears to my eyes every time I get a message saying, "You help me be better in the workplace."
Well, they're good. They're good.
I just, those courses have been powerful for me just to reconnect with the community and ways around it. But, they're next week, starting next week, LinkedIn is doing a bunch of DE and I tracks, and they're going to unlock my course on neurodiversity free for everybody in the world for 2 weeks.
Oh, wow. Cool. Yeah. That's
so
good.
I'll put it out on my LinkedIn on that, but
you'll be even more famous, Tiffany. But all cool.
Well, I'm just a mom, guys. I'm just a mom. Trying to make a difference in the world.
But you know what? Like a big thing, I had a meeting like last week, right? And it was to do with like the finance sector, so banks and all of that type of stuff, right? And I was speaking with these lovely women who are a part of this diversity program within that sector. And they were talking about how, neurodiversity just is a huge gap in that sector there. So, one of the questions that they asked me was, how can we convince organizational leaders to invest in neurodiversity training? Because I think the biggest thing that we were speaking about in that meeting was, usually you need to have some data there. How is that going to benefit the type? And it's probably too early. I don't know. Is it too early at the moment to show that data that it's effective? I don't know. You're the doctor.
Yeah, I know. So when you're selling something, you're trying to get a buy off, you need to look at it in 3 different ways. You need to look at, this is all Aristotle, the ethical, the emotional, and the logical. So from a business case standpoint, there is a lot of great data out there telling us, one, you need to reflect your customer base in your business. So we just heard a report, CDC is saying and I believe this is just in the US, 1 in 38 8-year-olds are autistic. 1 in 38 of your customers. And they all families and fathers that we're finding out about the rate of ADHD in the workplace, the comorbidity or the co-occurring conditions that people have. These are real things. So those need to be shown. Like, you can't miss this population, because if you figure out all those people coming from college, if you look at the amount of people, you can get the data too on the amount of people with college educations that are looking for a job, but because they can't get through the interview process, or the job descriptions don't make sense, or they're not concise enough, so people don't think they fit the job, they're not applying. These are facts that are out there you can use. That's the logical fact. But there's also the ethical, which is just kind of the ethical emotional. I kind of go back and forth. But if you have people in your community that are coming to you, those who want to start an employee resource group or an affinity group, whatever you want to call it in your organization, you have people that are coming together saying, this is important to us. And if they're coming together, you need to listen. And so a lot of times we get asked, and I'm probably really called for doing this, but I'll talk to almost anybody about some good steps on starting that process at their company, because if the company knows people care about it, then they need to listen. And I think ERGs can be so powerful because in this data, parents that are involved, people who have loved ones, but also the individuals can come together. And a lot of times that's where neurodiversity education will begin. It doesn't start necessarily manager training, but even bringing awareness that it's a thing and the predominance, and also really just how different it looks. People, there's always the saying is people equate neurodiversity with autism, and that's not right. What is it? What are the different verges of it? What do they mean by divergence of mind? You'll see us starting to get away from, in our group, using the word neurodiversity a lot because we feel like it's getting commoditized. People are trying to make money off of it left and right. We find that it's just becoming more complicated to explain to people the number of things that people are identifying with it, which to me, identify all you want, whatever you want to be with that umbrella. To me, it's a personal choice. But if I'm trying to now translate this into making action, I need something a little less loosey-goosey that I can talk about. And so that's not always an accepted thing because of, I get yelled at a lot by the community, but I now talk more about cognitive diversity or diversity of thought. And those things are really what it comes down to, is because my brain functions differently than everybody else, it's a diversity. It's different. And we all have the diversity, but I have more of a cognitive diversity than the typical person does. I don't know. There's all those lines about typical, not typical. I don't even want to get into that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Maybe we could do another. Maybe we could do another podcast on that.
No, I don't want it. I don't want to hear that the temper cold. Sorry, I have someone you can bring in for that one. Bring in Nicole for that. But I'm just saying, like, that I don't even know what you're talking about, but that makes it hard.
Yeah.
The buy-off on it. You have to have people in your community wanting it. You have to have leaders that are going to listen. And they're going to empower. So there's this big thing, and then the research, and I've seen it too. The people at the top need to support it and give you the resources. The people on the line need to have the education. That's the only way it's going to work. If the people on the line don't have the resources and the support and the buy-off from the top, it's useless. Absolutely.
No, can I also add that I think it's important to have representation in leadership as well. And I think that's critical, having that lived experience where those influential decisions are being made, where that perspective, in the boardroom can be given in those committees. And also I think another term for the working group that you'd mentioned was communities of practice. So individuals getting together, not only within the organization, but potentially sort of on the out externally, but talking about their experiences and then building that tribe or that network of allies that then empower to push from the ground up to get those changes made. So I think it just requires us being sort of imprinted in that in all of the DNA, really.
But the thing you're going to find, and I agree with everything you said 1,000%, and representation is more and more significant. I see the next question is about some research things. But you'll find that people aren't safe yet to be the ones being represented, And so if I'm somebody who identifies that I'm in management, I haven't told anybody yet, I need to feel safe saying it. But here's the thing. Once I say it, this is what I found. My bosses usually go, well, now I can't fire her. I wonder if she's already on, she's already on our hit list or whatever. We're looking at getting her out because Tiffany's not doing what she needs to do. So now that they disclosed, I can't do anything about it. And we go, no, that's not it. That's a misconception. If you're doing your job right as an organization and this individual's not performing, you should have a documentation. You should have feedback. You should give it all that information. And that leads to them being, let go or whatever, separation. Not because suddenly Tiffany tells you she's, a diagnosed ADHD or dyslexic that you decide to let her go next month. If you decide to let me go next month and I told you, you have a record showing me that you've already started this process. And that's the problem, is organizations are so lacking in their documentation and their feedback cycles. And it's hard. I mean, I admit it, it's very hard. So I guess you want to ask me this question. Is there research or stats that show the benefits of neurodiversity?
Well, Yeah, well, the thing is, like, let's say, for example, someone is trying to really, and the reason why I'm asking this is based on the meeting I had with this organization the other week, and they were saying, they've got to build a case to take, but they don't know where to get information from, or where is that research, or what's the best route to take there. I'll read out the question, because there's probably people who will be listening to this podcast. So I'll say it. It says, is there research or stats that show the benefits of neurodiversity training? How can people build a case?
So when it comes to training, we're not going to find a lot of useful stats, period.
Is that just at the moment, or do you reckon that will build up over time?
Apples to apples, buddy. Apples to apples. So let's say, and I'm very proud of us and our training capabilities at Grit and Flow. Do I trust that somebody else doing the same training or name of training is giving the same information? No. So if I'm trying to do research, how do I guess the quality and the receptiveness too? It's like, you can train, but are people understanding it? Are they applying it? Is that really what training is? Or is it just, I listened to a class, I could check a box? So training itself is hard to operationalize. So I think that's going to be the hard thing. But what you're going to, I think, see eventually is that managers who have gone through some form of, dedicated education and support on managing, neurodivergent individuals have shown to have higher retention and better. It's going to be those other factors. The measurement itself of the training is going to be difficult. We are trying to measure that for our efforts. They're not things we publish externally, but for our clients, we do a baseline study. So we found some measures about there's more stuff about autism. So we have to go to that sometimes. Wish there was more. But what is your inclusive leadership? How do you perceive your inclusive leadership? How do you, how's your societal acceptance towards autism, the SATA? What are your accurate knowledge of autism? There's this thing called the Dunning-Kipper effect, where people think they know more than they know, so they don't feel like they don't need to be educated. So we try to figure out those things, and so we do it at time zero. And then we don't even talk to them before we do that. And then we go ahead and do our overall group trainings. We do manager training, and then we continue those constant conversations. And we go back and retest, 3, 4, 5, 6 months later, depending on the project. And we compare, have we made a difference in these things? And that's the only thing we really feel we can do at this point, to try to measure an intervention, which to us, to intervene isn't just to give a training. Our intervention is to be continuous education and practical information. So that's where, when it comes to the data, I feel it's going to be very sticky. Because as a scientist myself, I can make anything sound a certain way if I want to interpret a certain thing. Really, we all can. So that's why it's challenging. We have to take our research, and we have to combine it with the practice of going out there and actually seeing how it looks. But we need to then combine with this lived experience of being a manager, being a person who's neurodivergent, being a neurodivergent manager. Like, all those things comes together, and that's how you find solutions. And right now we're not seeing that in enough places. And that's where we're very passionate about making sure we're always bringing all those together. And we pause and we stop as a team and say, are we doing this right? And we have to stop it. Okay, we lost our eye on that. We got to come together. And so we're always checking each other, because that's so important for us and what we want to change in the world. And I'm like,
but would you say, with you're talking about the evidence, research and all that type of stuff, but let's say you're doing something with a company, you're probably not allowed to release that information.
Yeah, I wouldn't anyway. Yeah, even if I
which then makes it hard for trying to go on to the next thing. Do you know? Let's say to try and get other people to go, whoa, this person, that company did this, and they did this and that, and whoa, my God, look, it's so awesome. It's almost like you've got to start from square one with a brand new company type of thing.
We've done some pretty cool things, really cool things that no one knows about.
That's because you're a cool person, right?
But I tell you though, those are the things that are the coolest. And we're small and lean, and if suddenly it was like, hey world, look what they're doing, and everybody starts knocking on my door, I'm not going to be as successful. So I rather work with clients that are intentional about doing it the right way. And as you can tell, we just don't take anybody because of this piece. You have to be willing to put the time in, the effort in, the culture change, everything else, or we won't work with you because we're not going to be successful. It's a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah. And before we go into this next question, right? Did you sort of, when I first stepped into the neurodiversity space, and we were talking a lot about neurodiversity and people's perception of neurodiversity, right? For a long time there, I felt that a lot of people thought that autism was neurodiversity. And we know autism's part of it, but for a long time, it's sort of like, hey, look, we're doing neurodiversity. We've hired 5 autistic people, neurodiversity, look at us type of thing. Have you found that that's been a bit of a problem because you're sort of like fixing mistakes of bad information that's been sort of pushed out there over the years type of thing?
There's pretty much like, and this is, probably a little blunt and harsh, but let's say we have a sign that says autism, whatever, at work. We're just slapped the sign neurodiversity on top of it and kept going with our day. I think that did happen a lot, not with everybody. But then you think about this, Sophia, is if you look at TV shows, do you ever see a dyslexic character that's really coming up, like The Good Doctor? I don't know shows DK or Shelton or whatever else. Are they dyslexic? Does that come up? Is that fun to watch?
I've never really thought about it. I don't know if I'd sit down. I might watch something if it was like, but I'd probably watch it to see if they've got it right.
Exactly. But I'm saying like the common folk, there's not a lot of stuff on other things besides autism. And there's been such a focus on it because I think of the number of children being diagnosed, which then affects the parents. And I think ADHD, I don't have any statistics on it. Is it a little bit later, a little bit more of the boy in the corner doing this? So that was kind of like, well, that's just what it is. But now we're learning about women and the different subtypes and things like that of ADHD. So now it's a little bit different. But for so long, it was ADHD is this or ADD, and autism is this big thing going on, but look how smart they are. And so even part of my dissertation I wrote about is the media and the community itself is saying, look, I can't keep up to the standards of The Good Doctor. I'm not a savant. So now you're putting all these characters up there on TV and people expect me to walk in there and have the world's highest IQ. And I'm just a normal Joe with a normal IQ that just happens to be an autistic person, So these have caused a lot of awareness, but at the same time, it can cause damage. And I think that's why the autism stays prevalent. The main thing, can't say that word anymore, is because of the amount of attention to it. And I think Richard Bronson, bringing up dyslexia, he's brought a lot to the awareness of it, people being successful and having it. But I don't think people thought much about it besides somebody sees words backwards or they can't read.
Yeah. And I when I hear people say you must read backwards or you see words backward, you know what I mean? Like the other way. I'm like, what? No. Or people go, can you read? I'm like, yeah, of course I can read. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, and I suppose they don't know any different type of thing because that's what they've heard, But you know what? But you were saying with the famous people, right? And we hear a lot of people dissing the famous people, going, oh, we only hear about famous dyslexics or famous whatever, right? But the big role that those people play is they are bringing attention to it. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And that's the important part to it. It's not that we're saying, hey, look, everyone can be a Richard Branson or whatever like that. It does bring awareness to it. And it is good for the movement type of thing.
Well, and it gets to that point of all or nothing thinking for many of us is, if we're trying to bring awareness. So like the Autism at Work efforts, I think they were amazing. We learned so much. We came together as a community. Do we need to progress past doing things like that? Yes, we do. But you have to start somewhere. And I think, some of the, neurotypes are still fighting that battle of awareness. You know,
Tourette's.
I'm learning about a new one almost every day. I just blows my mind. So you're never going to be an expert of it. Everybody else, but you have to be. I think we're becoming, with the neurodiversity movement, more open to hearing that there are these differences. So I think that's the big benefit in the neurodiversity movement, is opening the thought that people are different in all these different ways.
Totally.
Does that make sense? But I still
no, totally. We've got a few more questions to go through, and then we should be done. Just if there's anyone listening, does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask Tiffany? Maybe you're just so awesome that you're covering everything so well, Tiffany, there. So maybe we haven't had many questions there, so you're doing really well. But what would be the easiest way to start implementing neurodiverse or a neuro-inclusive workplace? And you said some stuff prior about, but you know, because I think the biggest thing is when I've been at like doing panels and that, people are like, where do we start? You know, what's the easiest way to start, type of thing? And, you know, I usually do say, you know, starting like a, you know, some type of committee or group or something like that can be a good way. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's kind of the representation. Is there anybody here who cares and is willing to put in the effort? To be honest. Because what I said before is you have to have the buy-off at the top. You have the people that are willing to go through the training to learn how to manage differently. And if you don't have that buy-in, any change, it's a change management issue. It's a change management process. It's not a hiring initiative or a project. It is a change initiative for the organization. It starts small, which is the way any change should happen. But I think that to make the change, to get people started, we need to recognize that it is that. Figure out who is there to represent, to help guide it. That way you have the voices involved, but you also pull in the people who are living there that are saying, okay, at Grit and Flow, this is what we need to change to be more neuro-inclusive. This is where we need to focus our efforts, because you can't start all the time on a blank canvas. It's too hard. So I think that's the easiest way to start. Not always going to happen. Sometimes people start because they hear about it and they say, you know what, this just sounds like a really good business thing. Like, we need more talent, and there's this great talent pool out there. Why aren't we being more intentional? And that's a great way to start too. And sometimes I've had champions that I've been talking to for 4 or 5 years that have worked talking about this, and finally are doing something, but they're relentless. So you have to keep talking about it and keep the conversation going. I think it's going to be easier and easier these days to have a better argument because of the exposure that it's gotten than it was a couple of years ago. But I think those are keys, because it has to have the buy-off. You have to have the buy-off.
It's definitely, I've even probably the last 2 or 3 years, it has grown so much more than what it was prior to that. You know, I remember going to, you know, DE&I events and talking about neurodiversity and people looking at me with like a blank face. You know, now those people who I was talking to are now ringing me going, hey, look, we've got a huge gap here. We need, you know what I mean? It's like, well, I was only saying that 5 years ago, but yeah, I'm happy to talk
we're
to
ready
you.
for it. I mean,
exactly.
The number of how much disability isn't in the conversation. I mean, you think about neurodiversity being huge. I mean, what is it? World Health Organization says something like 15 or 16% of the world population is disabled. And I think 96% of those disabilities are non-visible. I mean, what do you do with that? It's not all about wheelchair users. So then you get into the more complexity of a hidden, you know, condition, which isn't a disability, but confused with a disability, you know, all that different things. There's a lot. It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah, totally. Now, we're almost ready to wrap it up here, but, you know, can you name any organization, or you don't have to, but...
I'm not going to name any organization.
What's that? Sorry?
Neurodiversity Academy. I'm naming them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But I think I want to sort of reframe this question, but I think a big thing that, you know, you spoke about before is, you did say, you spoke about a company, we don't need to name the name of the company, but they first originally started with a neurodiversity hiring program and sort of realized that was good in itself, but what's the word I'm looking for? They've now realized that, hey, hang on, what we really need is this here type of thing. Are you seeing a lot of other organizations starting to move away from that whole, it's about hiring and go, oh, hang on, before we hire, we need to get this environment right first.
Right. I'm seeing that more in the way of organizations who have done hiring initiatives, who have been consultant roles will really help those. I'm seeing now them realizing they need to do what we've been talking about. Once I am tooting my horn because I'm very proud of us, but preparing the environment before you bring people in. You really can't. I always call it like, okay, let me just drop. And if you're listening to this, I'm taking something and dropping it in the middle of nowhere and expecting it all just to work out fine. The hiring is just a very small piece of it. It's retention, it's thriving, it's everybody around it. So that's where I'm seeing the change happening. Unfortunately, it's happened with a lot of lives damaged, a lot of people hurt, and these things done wrong. I talked to one gentleman the other day, and he did do probably about 4 or 5 of the different Autism at Work programs, and some of them have been really positive, and it was just really great communication. Some weren't, and you could just tell, that they were using me as a token in some of these programs to say like, hey, we hired, 15 autistics or 15 neurodivergent, and then let me go 3 months later, or they put me on contract. I wasn't actually hired, but they used me as promotion. Those are the things that are causing the most damage to people. But I think we're getting past that, and I'm really happy about that. And I'm not dissing Autism at Work things, because I do think they've done a lot of things good and well. But I think it's time.
Sophia and I, we chatted about this not long ago, and one of the really important things Sophia raised was like, it is giving people that experience. They're getting some work experience that they can then, because a lot of them are internships. Is that correct, Sophia?
Yeah. Yes. I'm sorry.
And like, so they're getting this experience, which can then help them go into the next role and all of that type of stuff. So that, I think there is some positives to it, but that's not neurodiversity.
Yeah, no, but it is, like I said, they're stepping stones. It's like awareness, exactly. But people being aware. It's all stepping stones. So I'm not trying to bash anything. What I'm really just trying to say is that we got to keep moving and evolving.
Yeah, I think it's more guiding people to what it is we're actually working towards.
And I don't think we really knew, to be honest. Yeah. I know from us as a standpoint, coming in 5 years ago, it took us a while to figure out what we were going to do to make this change happen, and then prove it, and then, rinse and repeat and keep refining. But it takes time to figure that out. And it's really not easy, because you're dealing with people.
And you're probably even finding with the stuff that you're doing, you're having to, you probably develop, you probably grow off that and redevelop it, because you're finding new stuff all the time.
Always. Or better ways to say things.
Realizing
that, we were given all this, but that's not really getting where we actually had a whole conversation with the team today about, we have like our foundational training we give organizations, and we're going back through them again, and we have to constantly go through them. And then also, it's like when you're training an organization, you got to find out where they're at to find out where they need to go, move forward. And we can't just be this black and white static thing. It's just, I think every culture, every industry, all of those things all come into play into how neuro-inclusion is going to look. And if you have someone in a manufacturing plant versus a programming shop, it's going to be night and day. And you almost get really different mindsets going into there and the way it's going to work. So there's no, rinse and repeat necessarily cookie cutter to any of this.
Totally. Sophia, did you have anything before we wrap up everything that we've gone through today?
I think it's more just about when we were talking about the supported programs, where I think more funding needs to be directed, because a lot of the times these programs are being subsidized by the government, is that investment of what the next transitional step should be. I think the biggest issue is, and you raised it, Tiffany, was they're in a position for 3 months. They might get, a casual contract or some sort of employment after the fact. Then it just fizzles off.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that level of support in the transitional phase is critical, because I've seen what individuals go through these programs. It gives them hope. It does provide them with work experience, but the what next, they need guidance on what next. Otherwise, that can have an even bigger impact on their confidence and continuation in the world of work. So I think that's the critical step in all of this, really recognizing that that's fundamental to ensuring that we tackle those underemployment/unemployment statistics. Because in Australia, it's anywhere between 40 and 60% for people with invisible disabilities. That's huge. And we've got a skill shortage at the moment. Something's not right when we've got a skill shortage and still such a high rate of unemployment.
Yeah.
So that's where my area of passion is in trying to.
No, I mean, I agree with you. Actually, in the state here of California, the Department of Rehabilitation, which is our government funding, they just put out a huge grant to give companies between $20,000 to $200,000 US dollars to help them like hire people like me, or to do education, or try to hire, because they want them to look beyond just supporting somebody. They want to look at being an inclusive practice that can retain people and keep them. So to me, that is good. Beautiful California to do that and think about.
Yeah.
That it is more than just hiring and supporting somebody at the beginning.
Yeah,
90 days. I don't know about you, but we have like 90 days and then you're on your own of support.
Yeah, that's hardcore. That's hardcore. But awesome stuff that you've covered with us today, Tiffany. It's always a pleasure when we sit down and have a chat with you. It's always a very informative. Is there a bird chirping out your window or something?
I thought it was you.
Oh, is that no? Because I'm like in like an apartment block. Is that you, Sophia?
There's nothing going here. I thought we had a.
Wow, where the hell's that bird coming from?
Oh, that's funny.
Okay. Well, yeah, I have no idea where that's coming from. But anyway, what a way to end the podcast. But if anyone does want to connect with you, Tiffany, with yourself, Grid and Flow, your company, what's the best way? Are you on? You are on social media, I know that.
Well, to be honest, I only focus on LinkedIn because it's a lot of work just doing that right and making sure that I address every question and every tag and everything else. So LinkedIn's always the best. Me personally at Tiffany Peyton Jamieson or gritandflow.com. There's a book with us on there. Any of those ways, or Google Tiffany Jamieson, you'll see a lot of funny looking people, including me. And click on the one that sounds like me.
Yeah, nice.
That talks about neurodiversity, and that would be great. But I love talking to people and learning from you. So please reach out.
And also, too, just a reminder to anyone listening, and just a reminder, the date is when is the dates of those when the LinkedIn stuff will be going free for 2 weeks?
The hiring and supporting neurodiversity in the workplace is free from May 15th to May 30th.
Okay, and we're in 2023 at the moment. So if anyone's listening, years on from this, you missed out. Sorry.
2023, and there's actually going to be a ton. I think there's like a couple dozen courses within the general DE&I diversity space that will be unlocked. So look at the LinkedIn site itself, because there's so many great instructors out there. That it's just a great opportunity to soak it all up. And you can get continuing education credits for a lot of organizations worldwide.
Yeah, great. Fantastic. Sophia, did you have anything else you wanted to sign off with before we close off?
I'm doing CEO sleep out. So if anyone wants to donate to
that's right.
Please.
Yeah,
so
good job.
I'm sorry for railroading, but it's
that good on you. I was actually going to say you should talk about that when you are on the podcast. So if you're listening, please donate to Sophia's CEO Sleep Out initiative there. That'd be great. But Tiffany, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate both of you wanting to talk to me and putting up with my rants. So thanks for having me.
Totally.
I will bet you all have a good day.
Yeah. We're ready to rock and roll. We've had a really good time chatting with you. So it's here in Australia, it's Friday. It's about lunch. We call that beer o'clock.
Beer
o'clock.
Quarter to 9 o'clock at night for me. So
well, it's Thursday where you are, right? Yeah. So look, the future's
We're
looking
not a beer
bright.
o'clock here.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Anyone who's listening, please follow Tiffany and all the great stuff she's doing. Sophia, thank you so much for filling in for Photon John today. Really appreciate it. For all of our listeners, please make sure you subscribe, like, and follow to all our social media platforms. Go to and subscribe to our website at openheartedsociety.com. My name's Will Wheeler. This is the OpenHearted Society. The OpenHearted Podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Till next time.
Thanks, everybody.